From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight is about the devastation caused by Hurricane Ida. President Joe Biden surveyed storm-ravaged New York and New Jersey Tuesday, inspecting the damage caused by the hurricane. The Category 4 storm is the second most destructive and intense hurricane to strike the U.S. Gulf Coast. Ida caused major flooding and knocked out power to large parts of the Louisiana region, which is a main hub for the oil industry. As the hurricane swept through the New York region, it dropped heavy rainfall, triggering flash flooding. The storm killed at least 47 people in the Northeast. It also turned streets into raging rivers, flooded basements, and shut down the New York subway. Hurricane Ida left a trail of destruction, which President Biden blames on climate change. He also said scientists for decades have warned of extreme weather now hitting every part of the country, and urged a systemic upgrade of the nation's infrastructure. His proposed massive infrastructure spending bill includes major funding for a green economy. The White House hopes the impact from Ida will galvanize action on the spending bill.
Climate change poses an existential threat to our lives, to our economy, and the threat is here. It's not going to get any better. The question, can it get worse? We can stop it from getting worse.
Law enforcement agencies and members of Congress are preparing for possible security threats during the trial of the January 6 Capitol rioters. A Justice for J6 rally is planned on September 18th. This is to support the more than 570 people charged with crimes related to the insurrection. A congressional source said Capitol Police will present a security plan to the Capitol Police Board this week. Meanwhile, the Metropolitan Police Department will also be ramping up police presence at the rally near the Capitol's West Front. The rally is being organized by Look Ahead America. The group is led by Matt Braynard, who served on former President Donald Trump's campaign staff. About 500 are expected to attend the rally. According to multiple reports, this includes members of far-right extremist groups. Crews removed a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee in Richmond, Virginia, to the sound of cheers from crowds today. General Lee commanded the Army of Northern Virginia during the bloody 1861-65 Civil War. The statue was lifted off its 40-foot granite pedestal by a crane to be carted away on a flatbed truck. Hundreds of people cheered under tight security. The statue became a focal point for U.S. protests for racial justice after the death of George Floyd, a black man killed by a white police officer in 2020. The Lee statue is among the hundreds of Confederate monuments in the United States that are now widely considered symbols of racism. More on this in a report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
Robert E. Lee's statue was cut in half and removed from Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia. The 60-foot-tall bronze statue of a Confederate leader had stood there for 130 years. This was the largest Confederate statue in the country. It was built nearly 30 years after they'd lost the war. Now an empty pedestal and a community garden remain where the statue once stood. Since June of last year, it's been a site of protests against police brutality. There were messages on and around the statue which had said, "Stop killing us," and BLM. At night, people would project images of Harriet Tubman and George Floyd onto the statue. Protesters on the site were often met with militarized police, tear gas, riot gear, shields, and pepper spray. Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army represented the South in the United States Civil War from 1861 to 1865. Hundreds of people cheered as it went down.
What do we want? Justice!
Muhammad Abdurrahman was one of them.
It was designed to demonstrate, erected to say that the white man will be supreme in all aspects of life, culture, politics, economics, sports, music, and and it coming down removes that stain on Virginia's history, on American history, and on the history of our city.
And it shows that, hey, people are listening. we're actually moving towards equality. If we continue to keep up these statues that show oppression, then we're just telling people that look like me and my daughter that you don't matter. So it's important. It's really important.
It's emotional, I will say, but I agree with him when he said it's liberating to know that we're moving closer to equality and people being more understanding and really understanding what people who are black and brown are going through.
The Proud Boys today and the Ku Klux Klan yesterday raised the same Confederate flag that the South Confederates had used for so long. This flag is now seen as a racist symbol.
Labor Day weekend this year was worse than last for COVID cases in the United States. The number of patients in hospitals was nearly 300% higher, according to data from Johns Hopkins University. The average number of deaths was also 86% higher than at the same time last year. The spike in patients and deaths comes as COVID's highly contagious Delta variant spreads across the country. It has also been attributed to Labor Day weekend travel. About 3.5 million Americans traveled last weekend, according to the U.S. Transportation Security Administration. This is despite the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, strongly urging unvaccinated people not to travel. While the full impact of last weekend's trips are still being assessed, the CDC continues to caution travelers. In related news, President Joe Biden will address the nation tomorrow to share his administration's six-pronged strategy to fight the pandemic this fall. The Anti-Defamation League, or ADL, is apologizing for its opposition to the Islamic Center and Mosque, which was to be built at Park 51 in Lower Manhattan over a decade ago. In an op-ed at CNN, the group's CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, says he owes an apology to the Muslim community. The title of the op-ed is, "On New York Islamic Center, We Were Wrong, Plain and Simple." The goal of the Islamic Center, known as Cordoba House, was to foster interfaith dialogue and promote peace and understanding. However, Islamophobes created a major campaign against the proposed Islamic Center. Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer, founders of the group Stop Islamization of America, dubbed the project the Ground Zero Mosque as they campaigned against it. The Southern Poverty Law Center is a legal advocacy organization that focuses on civil rights and public interest litigation based in Montgomery, Alabama. It has designated Spencer and Geller's organization an anti-Muslim group. It has also called Spencer one of America's most prolific and vociferous anti-Muslim propagandists, and Geller as one of the most flamboyant anti-Muslim activists in the United States. El Salvador on Tuesday adopted Bitcoin as legal tender to circulate alongside the dollar. It is the first country in the world to do so. The government will accept it for tax payments. Businesses will also be required to accept the token in exchange for goods and services. El Salvador's government bought 400 bitcoins, valued at $21 million, ahead of the nationwide rollout. But the International Monetary Fund has warned that Bitcoin is risky business. It also said that cryptocurrencies are falling across the board today. Bitcoin's rollout has been met with much skepticism and fear over its volatility and its effects on the Central American nation's ailing economy. El Salvador's economy contracted 7.9% in 2020, largely due to the coronavirus pandemic. Hundreds of people have already taken part in anti-Bitcoin protests. An opinion poll suggests a majority of El Salvador's 6.6 million people would reject the currency. 3 rallies were held across Afghanistan's capital city, Kabul, in the latest signs of defiance against the Taliban, which swept to power last month. Videos posted on social media show dozens of women marching through the streets under the watchful eye of armed Taliban soldiers. Protester Sara Fahim told AFP at a rally outside the Pakistani embassy that Afghan women want their country to be free and rebuilt. More than 70 people, mostly women, gathered holding banners and chanting demands. They shared their frustrations with security, free passage out of the country, and alleged meddling by Pakistan. Pakistan is among 3 countries that recognize the last Taliban government. The other 2 nations were the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Former Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's government, which was allied with India, has long accused Pakistan of supporting the Taliban. Here is Armaghan, a 19-year-old protester. Scattered demonstrations have been held in smaller cities as well in recent days without Taliban interference. Marches began a day after resistance leader Ahmad Massoud called for an uprising against Taliban rule. At Tuesday's rally, some Taliban members fired in the air and briefly detained reporters. Iran on Monday said developments in Afghanistan's besieged Panjshir Valley are worrying. The Taliban claimed victory in Panjshir on Monday. Iran had been a strong supporter of the Panjshir-based Northern Alliance. This was led by Ahmad Shah Massoud in the 1990s when it was fighting the Taliban. That statement was Iran's first direct rebuke of the Taliban since the group took control of the capital Kabul last month. Tehran and the Taliban have developed close contacts in recent years. The European Union is taking steps to avoid a repeat of the continent's 2015 migrant crisis. It is establishing a $710 million fund for Afghanistan's neighbors to assist them in hosting Afghan refugees fleeing the country. Home Affairs ministers of the 27-country union discussed details of the draft proposal at an emergency meeting in Brussels. This comes after a large exodus of Afghans following a withdrawal of American troops in the country that ended last week. If they agree to host the refugees, Iran, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan could be beneficiaries. The Financial Times reports the money would be part of an Afghanistan assistance package of about $1.18 billion. It would include about $354 million in direct humanitarian aid. Most of this is earmarked for women, girls, and other vulnerable groups. The final refugee package will be adjusted in consultation with other international partners. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. In one of our previous in-depth analysis segments, we discussed the issue of Islamophobia in Canada. Let's watch.
Thank you so much. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Irfan Chowdhury, who is the Director of the Office of Human Rights, Diversity, and Equity. Irfan, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
Our pleasure. Now, the province of Ontario has just recently granted around $300,000 to a couple of Muslim organizations just for the purpose of fighting Islamophobia in schools. Now, when it comes to increased tolerance and understanding, how important are such diversity programs within educational institutes in your professional opinion? And will this make a difference?
No, it's a good question. I think the funding is important, but I always have that with a caveat if it has to be sustainable and it has to be consistent. And so often what you see with these types of funding programs, there might be on 1 to 3 year cycles, and that's where it really has the gap in a broader impact, I would say, because often these programs, educational related, awareness related, they get, funding at the beginning. And then when things really amp up in terms of awareness and people being able to connect to these types of funding and educational opportunities, funding is now not available and these projects just disappear. So I think the funding is always a good start, but it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be long term.
Now, with a string of recent Islamophobic attacks across the country, which we can trace back to the 2017 Quebec City mosque shooting, as well as the Muslim man in Toronto that was shot outside of a mosque just last year, do you believe that Islamophobia is a real issue in Canada and Ontario?
Yeah, I mean, the numbers, as we're kind of being more aware of them, are unfortunately speaking for themselves. Even before the Quebec mosque shooting, there was a number of, smaller related, incidents in and around Muslim communities across Canada. But now we're seeing more visibility in terms of the levels and layers of violence, right? And the unfortunate, crime that happened in London a few weeks back. To me, that would have been a tipping point. Quebec mosque, actually, for me, would have been a tipping point around just the impact of Islamophobia in Canada. But then what we saw with London, it kind of highlights it's still a key consideration. And what's really unfortunate is how it still continues even after such a horrific event that we saw a few weeks back. Because people, in Edmonton, for example, 2 Muslim women last week were attacked at knife point wearing the hijab. In a public space. And so these things still continue. And I think there needs to be more of elevated discourse and awareness of just the impact of how people might have misconceptions about the community that go unchallenged. Well, now we're seeing them being amplified in negative ways in offline spaces.
Now, where do you believe that this anti-Muslim violence and sentiment in Canada is emanating from?
In some of the work I've done on researching, hateful content on social media platforms, that's the easy starting point, especially how we've been, engaging online for the last year and a bit because of COVID. A lot of our lives have shifted, almost 100% online in terms of social interactions. But I think what becomes more problematic is it's not the overt, sentiment that's impactful, because most social media platforms now are able to kind of take away or remove some of the overtly hateful content. It's the subtle stuff, right? It's the things where people say, well, don't come to our country, we can't adapt, different tropes like that. Even though many Muslims in Canada have been here for generations and generations, you still have this very strong dynamic of othering the Muslim community in Canada. And it's really amplified on social media through the sharing of memes, through the sharing of misinformation, through the sharing of, uneducated assumptions related to the community and a fear of Sharia law coming into Canada. And I think all these types of misinformed frames of references are able to really scare individuals that don't have an awareness or a broader scope of the world, and feeds into their ignorance, if we be quite bold. And then we're seeing some acting out in very violent, negative ways. And so I think there's been an amplification of the anti-Muslim narrative online, just in the context of COVID, but also in the context of what we're seeing in Canada. No racialized group has been left untouched in terms of discrimination in a COVID era, right? If you just look at it the last year and a bit, almost every racialized group has been impacted in a negative way because of stereotypes, because of violence, because of discrimination. And I don't know, and they're still early on in obviously our understanding of the COVID impact on these social interactions, but it's something really to be mindful of, that, it's being something like racial violence has been impacting all communities in Canada. And that's something really, really to pay attention to.
A lot of talk recently on countering the hate through legislation, and community level organizations of all kinds and sizes are planning things like roundtables and summits to help inform the government of such human rights recommendations from their end. However, do you believe that this will play a role in shaping anti-Islamophobia legislation, keeping in mind the perceived failures of Bill 21?
I'll be optimistic on this, but I'm also hesitant in the sense of, even a couple of years back when M103 was being put forward, and the only thing it was asking was for, members of parliament to condemn Islamophobia. And still there was a lot of resistance to that in terms of just even condemning it because of people feeling it was, playing identity politics. And so I think, we'll see how we are now, fast forward from the Quebec mosque shooting, fast forward from the attack in London, Ontario. I'm really interested to see how this, national summit comes together and what real meaningful change will come. But I'm not sure, because all these things always depend on political cycles, right? So in the event there's a federal election happening, how might that impact any traction the summit has? In our province, both major cities, Edmonton and Calgary, will be going through municipal elections in October. And so seeing a lot of political candidates at the municipal level even highlighting platforms to address hate at the local level. But again, until we see the action, it's always going to just be words. And so I think that's where I'm hopeful we see more concentrated efforts, but it's more, proof is in the pudding in terms of how we understand this.
A lot of people are looking at the rhetoric of certain political leaders in Canada and how they have just spoken about Muslim rights over the years and how that might have contributed to this general Islamophobic sentiment or atmosphere that's been culminating until now. Do you believe that Canadian leaders have a responsibility to practice what they preach in order to increase understanding and tolerance in society?
100%, right? I think when you look at it, even in 2015, when the Conservative Party put together that barbaric cultural practices hotline, that single-handedly, put Muslim Canadians on the spot in terms of being perceived as a barbaric culture, that has long-term ramifications, right? You'll still see some of those information pamphlets and posters circulating online that really, again, fuel this fire. And so if some of these political leaders have had a growth experience and are learning that their, position or their stance or their statements in previous years has really been negative and has impacted the community in a very, very harmful way, yes, acknowledgement is step one, but step two is what are you going to do about it? Because right now what I'm observing is a lot of people in these positions of power have no idea what to do. And I think that's really concerning because you have a lot of people in the community across Canada looking at political leaders to see what will you do. And there's a big question mark in terms of what can be done. And I don't know if anyone has the appetite to really go down a path that this needs to go down in terms of looking at our hate crime legislation. Challenging some of the freedom of expression pieces that people are able to get, away with some of this hateful content. And so I think these are the conversations we need to start to open up, and not saying we want to take away, our rights and freedoms that all of us have. But I think we need to take a second look, because if our laws right now and legislation right now are incredibly weak to help us deal with some of these nuances that aren't overtly connected to hate crime, criminal code categories, we need more. And I think that's what I'm not seeing in terms of the appetite for people to have this type of dialogue.
We wanted to be advantageous of your presence today and ask you, when it comes to recommendations, what do you think that the federal government needs to do to help curb anti-Muslim hatred and violence in Canada?
Yeah, I think one starting point, again, I always know how long it takes to change legislation, but our hate crime legislation has not been looked at in this country since the 1990s. And so I think there's time to just, look under the hood, look at the language, look if there's any additions. In 1990, there was a section that was added under sentencing principles to consider hate and bias as a motive. And that's broad and applicable, but we also don't have some language around some of those nuances. And I think when we put that lack of direction in our legislation and leave it to the discretion of individual police services to administer that, it becomes very inconsistent, because one officer might deal with something in a completely opposite way than another officer, still the same type of file, let's say, but because that discretion is there for them to adapt how they choose, that's where you have inconsistency. So that'd be number one. Number two, we need more formalized hate crime training for law enforcement across Canada. Right now, it's done very inconsistently. Right now, most hate crime units tend to be under-resourced. And so I would argue, in addition to training, resourcing more of these units so we have that better capacity from an enforcement perspective, while at the same time trying to build capacity at the systemic perspective. And that's the one that's going to take a lot of time to address.
Some great insight there. We're here with Irfan Chowdhury, who is Director of the Office of Human Rights, Diversity and Equity. Thank you so much, Irfan, for your valuable time today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. We discussed the importance of cybersecurity in one of our previous segments. Let's watch.
Thank you, Hannah. Cybersecurity has become a major concern now, not just between countries, Russia and the United States and the rest, but also for the businesses. Small businesses, many times the cyber attacks news does not become a news. To discuss all of that and what we can do about it is an expert who's a cybersecurity expert, Alexander Crowther. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Professor Crowther is a professor at the Florida International University. So what are the biggest cybersecurity threats right now?
Well, we're seeing cyber crime climbing exponentially. And so if you have information, it doesn't matter who you are. If you have something that is monetizable, that they can make into money, or money itself, they are going to come after you. And so we are all at risk. You get emails, you get text messages every day that claim to be from somebody legitimate that are not. And when you click on the link, they will be into your systems, and then they will either steal your money and or your information, and no one is really safe.
So what are the different types of cyber attacks?
Well, so the major denial type attack is called denial of service, and that's where they just shut you down by overwhelming your system. Picture somebody calling your phone every couple of seconds, except multiple times, multiple sources calling your phone gets overwhelmed. It's the same type of thing. That's for denial. The main one we're talking about here is taking information or money. And so what they'll do there is they will break into your system, and if they're stealing money, they will pretend to be you. They will steal your authentication data and then move the money to them. Or if they're looking for information, they will break in, they will look around, and they will download the information. But the main point is how all these start. Over 90% of successful cyber operations start with phishing. You know, that message that you get that says, this is your bank, we have important information for you, click on this link. And those are all false. They're phishing attacks.
So it is called phishing, like a...
Yes. So phishing with PH, phishing.
With PH, but sounds like the first phishing as well.
And it's that's where the name comes from, right? Is they're phishing for your information, they're phishing for data. And so that's how they get in. So actually, to resolve this issue, we just need to practice cyber hygiene. And the first rule of cyber hygiene is do not click on the link. Do not trust any message that comes from anybody. And even if it comes from allegedly a friend, I suggest that you contact that friend and make sure that they have sent the message. Don't trust any message that you get via an electronic means.
Especially if it is probably some business or financial transaction or any type of link.
Any type of link. They're very good at at putting these messages together. Sometimes it will be allegedly from your grandmother who says that she needs money. Sometimes it will allegedly be from your bank. Sometimes we get phone calls about the warranty on your automobile, things like that, and they disguise them as many different things. There is no limit to the ingenuity of the human mind, and cyber criminals are proving this every day.
So what is ransomware?
So ransomware is where they will go in and they will change your password on your computer or on your files so that you may no longer access those files. And then you have to pay them money in order for them to either change the password back or give you the new password.
So Professor Crowther, you mentioned cyber hygiene. How come cyber hygiene is not as well known nowadays as the other hygiene, which we're trying to save ourselves from the COVID-19?
Well, that's a great question, because we really should have a systematic societal approach to cyber hygiene, starting with children and older people, the third age, because both of them are accessing platforms, phones, tablets, things like that every day, but they don't have this type of training. In high school, you should have cyber hygiene and the appropriate use of information and information technology. And then as you go on from high school, you should be getting information on how to use information technology and information appropriately in the workspace. But we don't have any system like that, certainly in the United States.
Are there any schools who are teaching children about it?
Yes, absolutely. The Florida International University has a partnership with several schools in South Florida where we are exporting that. So even though we're a university, we teach elementary school children that in the area. We have special programs for high school children. Every university should teach cyber hygiene. Every high school should teach cyber hygiene. And then as you go along in a profession, our professional schools, like our business school has cyber for business, our medical school has cyber for medical. I'm involved in all those programs because it's an interinstitutional approach to cyber hygiene.
So is there anything else which individuals can do other than practicing cyber hygiene to safeguard themselves?
Well, believe it or not, cyber hygiene takes care of most of it. The Australian Signals Directorate, which is their version of the National Security Agency, says that proper cyber hygiene takes care of over 80% of your problems. So problems that you and I would have on a daily basis, cyber hygiene would be sufficient. Of course, you want to run a antivirus software at home as well.
When most of these attacks are coming on businesses, so do businesses need to have a sort of a cyber strategy on which all employees are trained, and are people offering these type of things? I mean, one thing is that insurance company and that pipeline which got stuck, big shots, and they're going after them. Are they going after smaller businesses as well?
Yes, they're going for everybody. If you have money or if you have something that is monetizable, they are coming for you. As a matter of fact, they have probably already come for you, and you just aren't aware that they have been there. So companies are doing this, but not every company is. We have a problem in that our senior leaders in the United States are not digital natives yet. It will take until 2050 before all of our leaders are digital natives. And so we have a vulnerability gap here. And so that's one of the things I do is talk to people and make them aware of this. But every company should have a cyber security plan and practice cyber hygiene in their people.
Now, are there some enough cybersecurity experts available in our country to have access and guide and advise and respond when small businesses need guidance for this?
That's a great question. No, we are several 100,000 cyber professionals short. And so universities, public universities, private universities, are all educating cyber people as fast as we can. but the appetite, the need grows faster than we can educate people, because every time you buy something now, it is a smart device. So your refrigerator, your printer, your car are all attack vectors. And so the vulnerability is increasing exponentially, whereas the number of professionals is only progressing geometrically.
Recently, a major insurance company, CNA Insurance, was also under cyber attacks. So are there some insurances available against the cyber attacks?
Yes, there is cyber insurance that is available, but insurance companies, they're actually discussing it right now after the Capitol pipeline operation and the JDS meat packing operations. The insurance companies are wondering if they can actually make any money off of this, or whether it will actually be a liability for them. Another thing is, you must be very careful when you read your contract before you sign your contract for cyber insurance, because it should have very onerous security requirements built into it. And if you don't do those security requirements, they don't have to pay you.
So tell us, if there are, news media here and there, and in personal experience, whole lot of these things come from Nigeria. And somewhere recently I read 50% of cyber attacks are originated from Nigeria. But what I was surprised that 25% of those attacks actually originate from the United States itself. So what governments are doing to ensure that the cyber criminality is checked in a better way?
Well, the FBI has the national lead for cybercrime in the United States. Some countries like Russia actually cultivate cyber criminals who will do cybercrime part-time, and then part-time they'll do operations on behalf of the Russian state. Places like Nigeria are pretty much, what you could say is the Wild West, right? It's there isn't sufficient rule of law there to be able to keep cyber criminals under control. In places like the United States, where we have a solid 98% internet penetration rate, 98% of the population has access to a computer of some sort. It's very difficult, especially with our civil liberties, where you can't, like China can observe every Chinese person on the internet. The United States doesn't do that. And so we can't just run around observing everybody. You actually have to have probable cause before you can start to monitor their activities.
I was curious when you mentioned that Russia has people who part-time make money through cyber attacks and part-time they work for the government. Is this a new model of espionage in the world?
Yes. So when the United States wants to expand cyber capability, we put a reserve component recruiting station next to Google or Microsoft. When the Chinese want to expand their capability, they make universities or companies host cyber militias. When the Russians want to expand theirs, when they catch cyber criminals, they say you have two choices: you can go to jail, or you can do cyber operations on behalf of the Russian state. So there's a question, certainly with the Capitol pipeline, the organization that was identified as probably doing that. Were they just a criminal organization looking for money? Were they a criminal organization working with the Russian state but not under direction of the Russian state? Or were they actually under direction by the Russian government?
Well, thank you so much, Professor Alexander Krauser, for your time.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.